Mars. I always thought of it as a romantic place, a planet of mystery and adventure.
As I said in my previous video, 2001 was arguably one of the best years for FPS games. No One Lives Forever, Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and Halo, just to name a few. Competing with these FPS heavyweights was a little game called Red Faction. Developed by a team called Volition Inc. and published by THQ. It was released amidst a storm of other fantastic shooters, and still manages to remain one of the more memorable of its time. You play as a man named Parker, who moves to Mars to work for a company named Ultor, who run the planet's mining operations. Lo and behold though, Mars turns out to be a destitute shithole, with even worse living and working conditions. To make matters worse, a nasty plague is running rampant throughout the workers, killing everyone off. So the miners do what any disgruntled employee would do, inciting a goddamn riot, fighting back and killing every worker in sight to start a planet-wide revolution.
Just let me go, or else.
You threatening me? Yeah, well, threaten this!
Because, you know, they couldn't just quit their jobs like a normal fucking person. As you'd expect, Parker finds himself dragged into it and has to fight his way across the planet to meet up with a woman named Eos, a one-eyed commie who is leading the fight.
The plague. There's got to be a cure.
Overall, the story is pretty pulpy as you'd expect, and the lip-syncing in the cutscenes is beyond horrid.
To hell with orders! Die, K-Pack!
But this again takes its major influences from Total Recall, so you've got to keep that in mind.
You were the first to see my nanotech shield in action.
It's not going to win any awards, but they did put enough effort and focus into it overall, so it's not just about moving from environment to environment with little purpose. Most of the weapons are really inventive and fun to use, and even the standard submachine guns and shotguns pack a real wallop and are modelled really well. There's a railgun that can shoot through walls and a high-powered scoped rifle wielded by mercenaries. It's a shooting game first and foremost, and you can really tell that effort went into making sure every weapon feels unique and serves a purpose. Red Faction runs on something called the Geomod Engine, which wasn't entirely groundbreaking in terms of visuals even for its time, though it gets the job done. The engine's real claim to fame was its incorporated Geo-Mod technology. Now the concept was that walls and other surfaces could be totally destructible, allowing you to bypass things like locked doors or proceed through otherwise dead ends. But the game never really uses this to its fullest potential. There's probably only half a dozen instances in the entire campaign where you have to destroy a wall to proceed, and the game makes it blatantly obvious that's what you need to do during these moments. I would really like a lot more freedom in these types of scenarios. Now I'm assuming that this was just because making every single surface destructible would have melted people's computers back then, and as a result, only a very small portion of surfaces in the game can be destroyed. But still, it's really a classic example of false advertising at its finest. One thing the game did really nail was the handling of vehicles. From hovercrafts, jeeps, through to submarines. They all handle very smoothly and are easy to pick up. And most importantly, they're fun. The submarine is the standout, with the controls really tweaked just right to get that sense of submersion and weight. And launching a heat-seeking torpedo at other submarines and watching them explode underwater looks pretty badass. Also worth mentioning is the game's soundtrack, composed by Dan Wentz, who also worked on the Red Faction sequels. It's a lot of really gritty synthy tunes that are quite catchy and really set the game's mood and theme quite well. The thing that really lets Red Faction down is the flow of the single-player campaign, which I can honestly say is one of the most inconsistent campaigns I think I've ever experienced. The opening few levels as the revolution begins is really awesome, showing off the majority of the game's destructible environments and showing off some large levels with a great layout. Then a few hours in, it takes a turn for the worse, forcing you into a really sloppily designed stealth section, where they strip all of your weapons and armor. You're told not to get too close to enemies lest they detect you, but the game never makes it clear just how close that distance can be. It's most often easier just to run past these areas entirely, bunny hopping to avoid taking too much damage. To add insult to injury, they force you to do a similar section later on. Once you've finished this ordeal, there follows a lengthy cave section, up against lots of mutant-type enemies, with very little ammo or health pickups. These areas feature lightning-fast enemies with near unavoidable attacks, and it's easily the worst section in the game. If you can make it through this though, it does finally regain its stride towards the end of the campaign, as you end up taking on a band of mercenaries for the game's final act. But still, the middle section literally drags the entire game down, and it's really disappointing, because these last areas have lots of great vehicle sections, with really refined controls and explosive combat. I would still think Red Faction is worth checking out, as it's definitely one of the better shooting games of its time. Aside from those few mentioned areas, it isn't a particularly hard game either, and it can probably be finished in around 5 or 6 hours. It's pretty cheap to pick up on Steam, and I didn't encounter any compatibility issues when trying to run it either. Out of all the crappy sequels, I would say it's still the best in the series, and ultimately if you're going to play any of them, then this is probably the one to check out. Overall, Red Faction's positives pretty much outweigh the negatives, so get your ass to Mars.